So this is a previously uploaded video that I'm doing a re-upload for so that I can add a little extra commentary here, mainly to address the critics who have addressed my video, because a lot of people after I published the first one had some criticisms, and I think they're worth addressing up front in this new upload. I'm going to leave the original version up because there's a lot of comments there that are worth reading. But one of the two major general criticisms that I tend to get, the first one is, why are you taking CinemaSins so seriously? It's just satire. Well, first of all, satire is not above criticism. Satire is an art form. Art forms are subject to criticism. I can criticize any kind of art form I like, for any reason I like, especially if I have a valid criticism. The other point is, CinemaSins tends to be taken seriously by a lot of people because, on the one hand, they do general legitimate criticisms of movies. I mean, they will point out things that really are flaws. And so when they do that, and then on the other hand, they say things that are clearly bad criticisms, people tend to take the bad criticisms just as seriously as they take the good ones. And so my point here is to point out that, CinemaSins does things that are just wrong, and in that sense, it's bad satire. So, I mean, a lot of people would argue in the comments on that original video that you can, the whole point of satire is to exaggerate the flaws of a movie. Well, CinemaSins doesn't always just exaggerate. Sometimes they literally make up flaws to attack. So you'll see some of this in my other videos if you watch all the way through. But the point is, there's good satire and bad satire. CinemaSins, if they're doing satire, is doing bad satire. So I can criticize it on those grounds. And I don't want other people watching their videos to come away with the impression that, oh yeah, that is a problem with the movie, when really it's not. So that's that. The other major criticism I tend to get, and I kind of wonder if people who make this criticism didn't watch past the first couple of minutes of the original video, is that I reference the book too much. CinemaSins doesn't care about the book. You can't use the book to correct the movie. Well, there's a couple of things with that. First, the first criticism that I make of CinemaSins, I will admit I probably should have gone into a little more detail, and I will actually add an extra segment on that just after my first critique, explaining a little more. But on a more general note, I should point out that CinemaSins also uses the book to send the movie in at least 2 places. In fact, in one of those places, in The Return of the King, they used the Hobbit book to send the Return of the King movie. So they're not even staying within the Lord of the Rings. They're going all the way out to the Hobbit and going to the book to send the movie. So if CinemaSins can use the book to send the movie, I'm going to use the book to save the movie. I mean, that's just fair. I mean, you play by, you make the rules, you play by them. So the other point I would say is that beyond the first one, where I didn't do a particularly good job of explaining my point, and hopefully we'll do a better job this time, as a general rule, I am just giving the book information as further interesting information. I am addressing these things as the movie criticisms, but I am also pointing out, by the way, the book solved this problem by, or by the way, in the book, it's this way, for the point of just adding information in case you've never read the book. So with that said, let me move on to my first critique, and then once the first critique is over, I will add some additional explanation as to what I'm trying to get at and make that point a little clearer, and a few other points worth adding. Michael Vonnen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and this video is going to be the first in a series of 3 debunking CinemaSins, everything wrong with Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King. If you've been on YouTube any length of time, you've probably run across their channel. They basically run through movies and catch cliches, plot holes, contradictory things, that sort of thing. And what I've realized over time is that a lot of their mistakes that they catch are kind of lazy. They're not really paying a whole lot of attention, and that really is true in spades with the Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to hit everything in their videos because, like I said, some of the things that they hit are like cliches. So, they'll point out that there's a particular cliche in a scene, and that's not a problem in a movie per se. I'm going to focus more on things where there obviously wrong, or it's something to do with the plot, or something like that. Occasionally they get a few things right, but most of what I'm going to be discussing, they're pretty bad off. Another thing I should mention up front, I try to keep this channel family friendly, but if you've seen CinemaSins videos before, they do have kind of bleeped out curse words, and that will be in the clips that I'll be showing from their videos, so just bear that in mind going forward. With that said, let's debunk some bad CinemaSins.
One ring to rule them all.
So wait, the One Ring is supposed to control everyone who wore the other rings, right? We're told later that the race of men were turned into the Nazgûl, but it didn't affect the elves and dwarves at all? Apparently Sauron put on his ring and tried to control the dwarves and elves by yelling, "Go ring," and all he got was sparks flying out of his fingers.
Okay, so this seems like a valid criticism because the movie leaves out a lot of information, but if you read the stories, then also the unfinished tales helps. But even if you just read the Lord of the Rings novels, you can get enough information to answer this objection, and there's nothing in the movie to contradict the answer. The answer here is when Sauron made the One Ring, the elves realized what had happened. They took off their rings, and so Sauron had no opportunity to actually mess with them. And then it says that the dwarves he couldn't subdue because their nature is just so hard and they're stubborn, and basically they can't be daunted very easily. And so there's really no answer here in the movies themselves, but the answer is there, and the movies don't contradict it. So I mean, it's not like, you can't really say that this is a problem with the movie. It just leaves out information because it's trying to compress the narrative a bit. So if you want more information on that, by the way, you should check out my video on the Rings of Power, which I will link to below. Now let's move on to the next one. Okay, so what I was trying to get out, and I think in my kind of off-the-cuff comments forgot to really hammer home, is that the movie is just hurrying through the exposition. They're not trying to give all the detail here. So the book gives a complete explanation basically for why this happens, but the movie doesn't, because the movie is not trying to give us the whole backstory, and in a movie setting, you don't want just loads of exposition up front. So the book explains why this happened to be the case. The movie doesn't, but the movie is just doing a good movie thing in skipping exposition. By the way, you do get some exposition later, and this was brought up in comments in the original video, and I should have mentioned in the original video myself, that we do get the impression throughout the movie that men as a race are particularly susceptible to the corruption of the Great Rings. And so that's why the elves and the dwarves didn't really fall prey to them as much as the men did. It's also worth noting that dwarves weren't exactly unfazed by their rings, because while the rings did allow them to generate more wealth, it also did tend to make them a little more greedy. So it's not like the rings were totally unharmful. It should also be noted that the elven rings were not ever touched by Sauron. So, I mean, you've got all these different factors, some of them brought up in the movie, some of them not, but we do at least get enough material in the movie explaining that men are particularly more susceptible to this than, as compared to the other races, and that should be enough for the movie-going audience to understand why they ended up, being more corrupted than any of the other races. I don't think there's actually a reference in the movie anywhere to the fact that the 7 rings are all lost. I don't think there ever is one, which is kind of sad. But at any rate, that was another point. The dwarves didn't even get to keep their rings forever anyway. So anyway, that's kind of a little more explanation as to what I was trying to get at with this particular criticism. The rest of my criticisms are, I think, clear enough. So this will be the last thing I add in this re-upload to explain what I was trying to get at, and hopefully it makes my point a little bit clearer.
What the f*** is Sauron reaching for? Just kill the guy! You have this huge mace for killing!
Now this is a fair criticism. Yes, why is Sauron reaching for Isildur? And the other problem with it from the perspective of comparing the novels and the books is that Sauron should be already dead at this point. Elendil and Gil-galad actually killed Sauron themselves dying in the process, and then Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's hand. So not only is this a problem just in the general sense of why does a bad guy always give the good guy time to escape from a bad situation in every movie ever, but it's also just wrong from the point of view of translating the novel into a story, and it didn't really have to be that way. So credit to CinemaSins for this one.
And I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I mean not to.
After Bilbo's unnerving proclamation, Gandalf apparently said, "Dude, you need to smoke some weed."
Why exactly this is supposed to be a sin in the movie, I don't really understand. Hobbits smoke pipes. Gandalf smokes pipes. Pipe weed is not weed, and everybody who knows Tolkien knows this. I don't get it. And this is just one of many examples, and it gets worse in Return of the King, where they just try to nitpick every little stupid thing. And I won't hit all of them, but I wanted to hit this one just as an example of why is this even listed? So let's get to something a little more substantive.
And turn them all to stone.
Bilbo then said, "Kids, I'll tell part 2 of this story next year, and I'll finally finish it the year after that, because even short stories are best when told in trilogies."
I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a reference to the fact that The Hobbit was made into a trilogy of movies or something else. But regardless, I don't see how it's a problem with this movie, since this movie is part of a trilogy of books made into a trilogy of movies.
When you see Gandalf magically transport like this, don't you wonder why he doesn't use magic more often in crucial spots during the trilogy?
Here's a good example of something that CinemaSins does a lot when they make bad criticisms. They leave out a bunch of stuff from the movie and then act like it implies something because of their omissions that isn't true. In this particular case, if you watch the movie, there's a mini montage where Bilbo is gathering up his stuff, getting ready to leave before Gandalf shows up. So did Gandalf magically warp to his hobbit hole? No, he walked up there, just like Bilbo did, in the time that Bilbo was getting ready to go. That's not the movie, that's somebody being just overly nitpicky.
What about this ring of yours? Is that staying too?
It's in an envelope over there on the mantelpiece.
Gandalf should probably know that that's not true because Bilbo had no time to put it in an envelope, but he goes over to the mantelpiece expecting to find it anyway.
Same exact problem as the previous clip.
What the f*** was Frodo doing for the last 20 minutes after Bilbo disappeared? Looking for Bilbo in places other than Bilbo's house?
On this one, I'll give them just a quarter credit because they're kinda right. In the book, it actually goes something like this. Frodo knows about what Bilbo's going to do. Bilbo disappears. Frodo kind of sits around and calms the guests down for a while, and then goes back to Bag End, knowing full well that Bilbo will probably have already gone. So in the book, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why Frodo doesn't show up till after Bilbo goes, but he's also not banging down the door looking for Bilbo. In the movie, you could explain that in a number of different ways, one of them being that everybody is going to Frodo thinking that he might know something about what's going on, since he is Bilbo's relative and it's also his birthday party. So you could imagine a similar scenario where he's being kind of hounded by a bunch of other people. The other thing is, if Bilbo disappeared, Frodo's first instinct might have been maybe he's already on his way, not going back to his house to pack. So, I can imagine different ways this could work out, but it just so happens that CinemaSins points out an issue that relates to a way that the movie diverges from the novel, so, like I said, quarter credit.
Gandalf sees the freaking eye of Sauron when he stupidly tries to touch the ring, but yet he still needs to do research to figure out what the ring is. Doesn't he have more than enough information at this point to give Frodo a head start before the ring wraiths show up?
Here's another one where they get partial credit. The way that the Eye of Sauron makes its way into these movies is definitely a little overdone, especially compared to the novel, where it really doesn't come up much at all. So, yeah, it does seem like Gandalf would be in a better position than he should have been, especially compared to the novel at this point, to know what the ring is. And there's really not a good explanation for what exactly. The only thing I can think of really as a way of explaining it in the movie is that he suspects very strongly that it is, but doesn't want to scare Frodo out of his wits until he's absolutely 100% sure, and therefore goes and tries to find out what he can find out to make sure, which is still kind of weak. So, yeah, I have to hand it to him on this one. It's a little weird.
This is the only time in the movie where the Nazgûl just straight up murder a dude. All he said was who goes there, and he gets snuffed out. This could have been the guy who knew all things Baggins, and they just destroyed their best lead.
I'm actually going to go so far as to give them full credit for this one, because not only are they right about the whole thing that this guy might have been a good lead, it's also a really bad idea if you're trying to be sneaky, as they are, or at least they are in the novel. Maybe not so much in the movies, but if they're trying to be sneaky, then the best way to do that is not to just murder the first random person you run into. So, yeah, it's kind of a problem. Now, the movies definitely, they seem to be taking a different approach than they do in the novels, where they actually go around talking to people, even trying to bribe people to find out where the heck Baggins is. But, yeah, I mean, there's just so many things wrong with this. They don't do that in the books. They take a very different approach in the books, and this is a really bad way of going around it. The first thing that's going to cause is all of the Shire to be in an uproar, because there hasn't been a murder there in centuries, probably. So, yeah, doing that's going to make their job a lot harder. So, yeah, full credit for that one.
Yes, Pippin! My point is, he's clearly overreacted.
I guess Farmer Maggot gave up? Or at the very least his side did?
Fun fact, we never saw exactly how far behind Farmer Maggot was.
Get off the road! Quick!
Convenient hiding tree is convenient. Also, this one of the 9 is terrible at his job. Isn't the ring supposedly calling to Sauron? I mean, why is he even sniffing? If his nose worked, he clearly would smell the hobbits, or the ring.
Here we get a twofer. Convenient hiding tree is convenient. They're in a forest. There's going to be a hiding tree somewhere nearby. As to the Nazgûl not actually finding them, yeah, that's kind of a problem. This scene is actually a fairly, shot-for-shot reproduction from the animated movie done by Ralph Bakshi back in the 70s, I think. And so there's a reason why they did it this way. It was an homage, but it does create plot issues and make the Nazgûl seem pretty bad at their job. And in the book, it doesn't happen nearly like this. They do hide behind a tree, but the Nazgûl never gets this close. So, yeah, that is a problem. But also, they had kind of a cinematic/fan service reason for doing it. So, partial credit on the second one. As to the hiding tree, really?
If the Nazgûl can't detect the ring 2 feet in front of their faces, why didn't Gandalf just find a container for the ring that he could magically seal, or at least lock, and throw away the key so no one could get into it? Frodo wouldn't be tempted to wear it, and no one could possibly detect it, and the road to Mordor becomes that much easier.
Well, let's see. If you put the ring in a container, and then you do have the temptation to put on the ring, if you can break that container, you're probably going to want to break that container, which means you're going to make noise and draw attention to yourself. Small problem. Not to mention, what kind of container would be so strong that you couldn't break, unlock, something like that? There might not be one in this world, especially one small enough to carry around all the way to Mordor. Have you thought of that?
Then he falls for the old toss something to distract the bad guy trick from every other movie ever.
Here's an example of what I was talking about and stuff that I'll be mostly skipping, where he refers to just a cliche that happens way too much. And yeah, in this particular case, it's particularly egregious because, like we mentioned earlier, the Nazgûl really should have been able to figure out that the hobbits were right under him in the tree. So this one is actually kind of worth talking about a little bit, but most of this kind of stuff I'll be skipping.
It went from day to night pretty fast here, but maybe that much time has really passed in this case. So if that's true, has the Ring Wraith been chasing the hobbits for several hours without making one bit of headway? And only now are Merry and Pippin asking what the hell is going on?
First, there's no reason to think that much time hasn't passed. Second, it's not that hard to believe that the Ring Wraith would have a hard time finding 4 small hobbits on foot in the woods while riding a horse. So why is it surprising that he would, not make any real headway? Plus, you can tell from their sweaty, grimy faces that they've been running like mad to get away from him. And then as to why Merry and Pippin are only just now asking, maybe this is the first good opportunity they've had to talk and not be noticed by the Nazgûl since they started running. Just maybe that's one explanation?
If the ring can will itself to land perfectly on Frodo's finger, then why the can't it just will itself to fly off into the air and roll its happy way back to Mordor?
Who said the ring magicked itself onto Frodo's finger? To the extent that it might have you considered the fact that maybe because it has influence over people's minds that it influenced Frodo to put his finger in the right place, not so much that it willfully moved itself?
How did Sam, Merry, and Pippin know Frodo was up here? They didn't call out to Frodo when he reappeared downstairs, so were they just running around crashing into every closed door until they finally ran into Frodo?
Here again, the movie kind of leaves out a little information that was actually in the novel. but not any that you couldn't infer. We do see that Frodo moves around after he puts on the ring, so he ends up in a different part of the pub. So when Strider grabs him, it could be that the other hobbits are on the other side, they see it happen, can't really do anything about it because there's a crowd of people in between, but they run after him anyway, and so they arrive just a little bit later because they've had to navigate a crowd of people in a bar. That's not really that hard to figure out from this scene.
At all times they feel the presence of the ring, drawn to the power of the One.
Until it's convenient for them not to be drawn to it.
Okay, even granting that the Nazgûl should have found him when he was right above them over the tree, he was still obviously drawn to the ring. So this idea that they're not, yeah, I don't know where you're getting at.
If you look really hard, you can see Tom Bombadil in this shot.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure why this is supposed to be a CinemaSin, but it is kind of funny that they threw in a Tom Bombadil reference, although I can see exactly why they left Tom Bombadil out of the movie, so I really don't think it's a problem with the movie per se, but I just thought this was a funny reference and worth including.
Either you don't care if Gandalf dies, in which case just kill him, or you want to keep him alive for some reason, in which case don't put him in a prison that basically anyone would die in at the first thunderstorm.
Fun fact, this is actually in keeping with the novel where Gandalf was indeed put on the very top of the tower, and we can imagine ways that Gandalf wouldn't die in a thunderstorm. After all, especially in this movie, not so much in the novel, but in the movie, Saruman is the one who controls the weather while they're trying to cross the mountain, so we can imagine that he could also control the weather enough to make sure that Orthanc doesn't get hit by a lightning bolt. Speaking of which, we don't know exactly what Orthanc is built out of, and so it could be the very material makes it resistant to lightning.
I know the hobbits are here for comic relief, for the most part, at least early on, but damn, nobody is anywhere near that stupid to light a fire on a tower at night when you're hiding from supernatural hunting machines. Nobody.
Okay, this scene annoys me a lot, and for the opposite reason that it annoys the people over at CinemaSins. See, in the novel, Aragorn actually has them build the fire because ringwraiths don't like fire. Now, to be fair, he also has them build it on the back side of the hill down at the bottom, not in an alcove that's visible from the road and everybody under the sun, or the moon, I guess, in this case. But the point is, there's a reason why they would have built the fire in the novel, and in the movie they back that all around and switch it and make it completely the opposite. So, okay, they get credit for criticizing the movie when the movie is probably kind of, in the terms of the movie itself, it's a pretty dumb idea. But on the other hand, they kind of don't get full credit because in the book it would have been, whatever. I'll just give them credit.
Also, Strider says he's just going to have a look around when he leaves the hobbits. Where did he go and how far away? He didn't see the fire immediately and start running back to slap all the hobbits for starting one? And he didn't notice the Nazgûl anywhere while he was looking around?
Okay, they definitely get credit here because, first of all, in the novel, Strider never really leaves the hobbits more than for a couple of minutes. And frankly, what is he out there doing? It makes no sense that he's out looking around for apparently hours. It's really, the only way you can explain it is as a way of making sure that in the terms of the movie that the Nazgûl have a reason to find where the hobbits are at and put them in a rather precarious situation so that Strider can then just come in at the last second and save the day. But that really isn't necessary, and so, yeah, this scene is just, the way they do it is bad on a number of different levels.
After we've seen them straight up murder people for asking who goes there, the Nazgûl finally find the hobbits and decide to go into a slow attack formation so that Strider can show up in time to save the day.
So here we have kind of the old cliche of the bad guy takes forever to kill the good guy again. And in this particular case, it's weird because in the novel they also kind of take their time a little bit, and you're not really ever sure why. And it could be in the novel because they actually have a fire going and they don't want to get close to it. It might also be because they don't know which one has the ring. In this particular case, it doesn't make much sense because it's just the 4 hobbits and they would be easy to kill. So, yeah, I mean, I have to hand it to them. The way they do this, the only real value that this has in terms of the movie is it builds up the tension. But then, there's probably other ways to do that without making it that obviously dumb.
Oh, these bad guys are afraid of water and fire. Wow, so Earth is like the only major element they're not afraid of?
So here I kind of have to explain. I cut out one clip where the rider chases them up to the Buckleberry Ferry, doesn't follow them into the water, and he says, "Oh, it's the old bad guy's afraid of water cliche." And so now they're referring back to that and adding on afraid of fire. So yes, they are afraid of water, and they are afraid of fire. And the reason for the water is probably the fact that elves tend to be happy about water because it's associated with the Vala Olmo. And he's obviously one of the good guys and very powerful, whereas the Nazgûl are bad guys. So there's a reason for that. But then, of course, they're also afraid of fire. We're never really told why. But that doesn't make it, stupid or bad or whatever. It's just, it's just the way it works. We know that the Nazgûl prefer nighttime, so maybe they just don't like fire because it provides light. Who knows? But anyway, point being, just because they're afraid of water and fire doesn't mean there's a problem with the movie. It just means that you're not accepting the fact that in this world there are certain rules. And those rules happen to be that Nazgûl are afraid of water and fire.
He's been stabbed by a Morgul blade.
You know, the kind that dissolve dramatically after you identify it?
I have to give credit here again, and in fact in the novel what happens is it dissolves when the sun rises. So yeah, it's kind of silly that it dissolves right after Aragorn says something. Why? There's no given reason. I mean, you can imagine reasons, I guess, but why not use the reason given in the novel and just make it obvious? So yeah, kind of a problem scene.
Do you know the Athelas plant?
Athelas?
Kingsfoil.
Kingsfoil, it's a weed.
Weed is the answer to everything.
Is it just me, or are these guys obsessed with weed? Makes you wonder what they were smoking when they were doing their critique of this movie.
Ah, I see. Elf horses have turbo mode.
Because no other horses can be spurred to greater speed when needed?
Arwen has the ability to summon a tsunami of water horses. What a strangely specific ability.
So, in actuality, she doesn't just have the random power to summon a flood of horses just any old place. It's, again, this is where the movie leaves out information that's in the novel. It's because it's on the borders of Rivendell that Elrond, not Arwen, who wasn't even there in the novel. Anyway, Elrond has the ability to do this because it's in Rivendell, and probably because he's got the Elven Ring and some other stuff. Gandalf also plays a role, because Gandalf is specifically the one who puts in the detail of the horses. So, just a fun fact.
Aquila ex machina.
Yes, the eagles are a bit of a plot device. Even Tolkien admitted that. But in a story that is very heavily tinged with the idea of providence and fate, is that really a problem?
Is there really nothing that Saruman can do about the eagle? Isn't he a powerful wizard? Doesn't he cause a avalanche from hundreds of miles away later in the movie? He spins Gandalf around and closes doors with his mind, but an eagle is just too tall of an order.
Oh, now you remember that Saruman can control the weather when it's convenient. Anyway, this does pose a little bit of a problem, because you have to wonder if Saruman can basically move things with his staff telekinetically. It does seem kind of a problem. You could explain it, I suppose, by saying that the eagles are semi-magical themselves and therefore resistant to Saruman's magic, but it is a little weird, so maybe partial credit on this one.
Destroy it!
So Elrond knows this is a ring of supreme evil. All the evil in the world can be ended by throwing the ring in the fire, but he lets Isildur go without a fight. He could have thrown him into the fire and then ran out screaming, "Oh no, Isildur fell into the fire. Whatever will we do? Oh, the humanity."
Here I'm a bit conflicted. In the story, Gandalf basically tells Frodo that because Bilbo didn't take the ring by violence and had pity, that's what helped him resist the evil of the ring for so many years. On the flip side, it does seem kind of strange that Elrond would just let Isildur go, and in the novel, it's not exactly clear what anyone knew at the time, and Isildur's motives were definitely not as just... We don't even know really what his motives are here, except that he wants to keep it, but in the book, it's a little more benign in the sense that he wants to keep it as kind of a memento for his dead father and brother who were killed in the war. So there's things weighing on both ends of this, but you can at least make the argument that if Elrond had taken it by force, which it's not even clear that he could have, Isildur could have won that fight, in which case we would have been short Elrond in the final scheme of things, and that could have been rather costly for the Free Peoples. You could even make the argument that even if Elrond had won that fight, because of the violent way he would have taken it, it would have corrupted him more quickly and therefore defeated the entire purpose. So, maybe a teeny tiny partial credit.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my axe.
You mean the axe you just shattered while trying to destroy the ring?
Because apparently carrying 2 axes is a physical impossibility in Middle-earth.
You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring.
Roll credits. Oh, wait.
This is one that I would skip, except they do this in literally every one of these videos, so I just wanted to point out now how silly it is to complain about the fact that they bring the title of it into the movie itself, because why not?
Where did they get sausages? Did they make them themselves out here in the wild? Or are they carrying raw meat casings for 40 days without refrigeration and then eating them?
Apparently the guys at CinemaSins aren't aware that there are other means of meat preservation besides refrigeration, and what in the world makes them think it's already been 40 days? Although in the novel it probably has, but in the movie, Gandalf says we have to continue for 40 days till we reach the Gap of Rohan. They're obviously not at the Gap of Rohan, therefore it hasn't been 40 days.
So, Gandalf, you tried to lead them over Galadriel.
These birds have no f***ing clue that that's where Gandalf decided to go. They flew past them. They may have seen them go run and hide, but they weren't around to hear Gandalf say where they were going to go next.
So, first of all, the birds could have circled back and then saw what Gandalf and troop actually did, or Saruman could have just inferred that was what they were going to do based on where they were at the time and the fact that there's no way they could get through the Gap of Rohan. Either one works.
Let us go through the mines of Moria. Let the ring-bearer decide.
What a cop-out.
It might not be exactly a cop-out. It could be that Gandalf is kind of leaving it up to fate, being in the hands of Frodo, so to speak. But I will say that this scene is kind of a problem for me because in the novel, Gandalf is actually the one who wants to go through Moria. Aragorn is the one who wants to go over the mountain. And so the fact that they have it twisted around here, it kind of puts Gandalf in a weird position where this scene does seem a little weird, where it's like he knows exactly what's going to happen if they go through Moria, but he's still willing to, risk it. So either way, though, it's still true that if they don't go back and try to go through Moria, they might all just freeze on top of the mountain, and either one is a deadly result. So coin toss is just as good as anything.
How does Gimli not know about this? Or Gandalf? This obviously happened a long time ago. Sure, there's no internet or phones, but word should have traveled faster than this.
So here we definitely do have some problems. Gimli, of course, is under the assumption the whole time that Balin is actually running Moria. Gandalf apparently has a completely opposite view, and they never really discuss why they have these completely different views. Now, in terms of the CinemaSins criticism that news should have traveled faster, not necessarily. I mean, it depends on what you mean by the news should have traveled faster. Yes, they should have stopped getting news from Balin, because Balin obviously has been dead for some time. On the other hand, that doesn't mean they would have found out for sure what had happened to the dwarves. In the novel, this is handled much better because at the Council of Elrond, they actually discuss the fact that the dwarves of Erebor stopped getting news from the dwarves who went to Moria some time ago, and they fear that they had been all killed, but they didn't know for sure. And so when they go there, everybody's kind of under this sense of apprehension, but none of them are really sure what has happened. So in the movie, there is a bit of a problem, although CinemaSins doesn't even really address the key problem, which is, why is it that Gandalf is the one who is totally afraid of what's in Moria, and Gimli is totally on the other end of the spectrum, and they've never discussed why? It doesn't make any sense. So they definitely get some credit here, but they kind of missed the real key point, I think.
Why isn't Frodo's blade glowing right now? Are all the orcs dead? Or right now? Right now there's definitely some orcs close enough to cause that blade to glow blue, right?
Here they obviously have caught Peter Jackson and company in an obvious error, and in the appendices to the extended versions of the movies, they do actually admit, yeah, we kind of screwed up on some of the glowing blade stuff, and in fact, Glamdring is supposed to glow blue as well, because it's also an elven forged sword. So, yeah, there's clearly a mistake here, and it wasn't really hard to catch, so credit for that one.
Gandalf said it was a 4-day trip through the mines, but it takes the Fellowship like a couple of hours, if that, to get to the other side.
It's a 4-day journey to the other side.
Wait, where do they get this idea that it only took them a couple of hours to get from one end to the other? If you watch the movie, there's clearly some cuts in the scenes where it's not entirely clear whether they're skipping from one area to another or if it's just kind of moving the camera. So it's entirely possible that the scenes between entering Moria and exiting are at least slightly montaged. And regardless, when he says it's a 4-day journey to the other side, and then you see several different sequences in a row, should you really assume they're all together? Obviously not, because even if you did assume that, then now you're saying that a couple of hours would have to pass in actual screen time. Obviously 2 hours didn't pass in screen time. It's maybe 30 minutes at most, probably a lot less. So this idea that it took them 2 hours to cross because they think that they can kind of guesstimate how long it took based on cut scenes doesn't make any sense.
8 that are here, yet 9 there were set out from Rivendell. Tell me, where is Gandalf?
Dude, this movie is 3 hours. Couldn't you just ask where Gandalf is right off the bat?
Maybe Gandalf isn't the only thing on his mind. Maybe there's reasons why he wanted to talk about other things first. Also, they are kind of trying to portray the kind of timelessness of Lorien, which in the novel is a little more explicit because they actually spend about a month there but don't even really realize it. So there's things going on here that explain why they're kind of going in a semi-slow-mo dialogue and why he doesn't just immediately ask where Gandalf is.
The mirror shows many things.
Why would the mirror show his friends making troubled glances? What can be learned from that? I could have told you that.
Here's a thought. Maybe it's a prelude to when Galadriel says in just a minute or two, he will try to take the ring. You know of whom I speak. One by one it will destroy them all. Just, maybe, off the top of my head.
He will try to take the ring. You know of whom I speak.
I'd love to tell you which person by name, but I'm afraid he'll hear this telepathic communication that only you can hear.
Okay, I will grant that the telepathic communication going on here is a bit silly and probably not, strictly speaking, in accord with Tolkien's ideas. Tolkien does have Galadriel, Celeborn, and Gandalf communicating kind of telepathically at the end of the novel on their way back from Aragorn's wedding, but you don't ever really get the idea that that's something that they can do with just anybody. It's probably because of the fact that they're elves, and in Gandalf's case, a Maya. So, I mean, that is kind of strange that they're doing it this way, but also the fact that she doesn't name him by name could be, on her part, just a way of making it clear that if you haven't figured this out yet about yourself, then you're you need to think about it a little more. So, although on the other hand, I will say it's kind of like, it's really more about getting the audience to do the guesswork than it is really consistent with the idea of the conversation that's going on between Galadriel and Frodo. So, yeah, I'll give him partial credit for this one.
Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn!
Terrible as the dawn? The f*** is that supposed to mean?
Granted, this line might seem a little strange to the modern ear, but you have to remember Tolkien is writing in a very, not very archaic style, but a somewhat archaic style, and the word terrible doesn't really mean exactly what we mean today when we use the word. It has a much older meaning that is a little more akin to just inspiring awe or terror in a less horror movie type sense. So when she says this, I can imagine exactly how Tolkien might have meant it. I don't know. I'm kind of guessing here, but considering the fact that when the sun comes up, it's a huge blinding light that comes from a gigantic ball of gas burning in the sky, although that's not quite what it was in the Elvish lore, that's, if you think about it, a fairly terrible thing. The power of the sun is a terrible amount of power. Even within Elvish lore, since the sun is not that, it's the last bloom of one of the trees of Valinor, it's still a mighty powerful thing, and you can kind of read this in conjunction with what Aragorn tells Éomer in the novel when they first meet on the plains of Rohan, and he says that the green earth is itself a thing of legend. So he's basically making the point. Everything about this is there's a little more awe-inspiringness to it than what you would tend to think just based on the everyday encounters we have. Yeah, we see the sun rise every day and we get accustomed to it, but if you really think about what it is, you can kind of see why you might call it terrible. So, yeah, like I said, it is a little weird to the modern ear, but I think that's because Tolkien is writing in a much older style and using words in an older sense than what we're used to. It has nothing to do with the movie being a problem itself.
Oh, now it's glowing again, and long before the orcs are even in view.
Yeah, you can kind of tell that they were mostly using the blade glows blue thing as a plot point more than trying to be consistent. It is an unfortunate part of the movie, so again, you have to give credit here to CinemaSins.
Frodo screams and stares at a drowning Sam for several seconds before helping him.
Perhaps because he's in shock? So, that was everything wrong with and not wrong with The Fellowship of the Ring. There's a lot of material to go through because you have to spend a lot more time actually explaining why it's not a problem than it is to try to show that it is a problem. They can give like a one-liner, and yet it takes me like a couple minutes to explain, well, here's why it's not as much of a problem as you think. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, please share it around, please subscribe if you want to learn more about Tolkien, and that includes both Middle-earth and non-Middle-earth related topics. And you can also follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore. Until next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.